Yes.
So, Dr. Prakash.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt the very interesting detour into a charcha, as the Indians call it, a charcha. And transform into a bhashan, one-way bhashan. So, just that you very nicely outlined some of the key issues, and I want to sort of just bounce off some of the things that he was saying. Just by way of preface, because I want to get into some of the legal technicalities and therefore also practicalities down the road. But going on from what just as you were saying, I think one of the interesting observations that he made is that somehow this problem of caste, when you really contrast the evidence that you see, empirical evidence on the ground, right, vis-a-vis the theories, it constantly produces what the scientists would refer to as anomalies, probably medical scientists, right? That somehow the theory doesn't fit the reality, right? Now, if it was a good scientific explanation of what is happening in, let's say, Indian society and culture, then it would have had to be adjusted, amended, right? Or simply thrown away if it doesn't work. But unfortunately, the continuous production of anomalies, like Jagbir actually, he recounted many of them, several of you were also referring to how things just don't fit, right? Somehow we have this theoretical framework, or alleged theoretical framework about the caste and the caste system, but it doesn't fit, right? And whenever anomalies are produced, actually the thing remains in place. Yeah. How comes it remains in place? What kind of creature is it? What kind of claims are claims about the caste system, such that they are immune from scientific scrutiny, right? Or even if they're not immune from scientific scrutiny, they don't seem to be adjustable in light of empirical evidence, right? As you'd expect in any other normal scientific domain, if you like, right? So actually, Jagbir is absolutely right. Yeah, if we take the study of caste as an aspect of or as an epitome of what's happening in the social sciences, I think Jagbir is absolutely right. Yeah. There is something seriously wrong with social sciences in the sense that they don't behave like sciences at all, right? And if we say that sciences are the best example of knowledge we have, right, then really they don't qualify, right, as knowledge units, right? As units of understanding or learning. Somehow they don't work for us, right? And yet we keep repeating them. Now, in order to understand what has been going on, why caste and claims about the caste system are of the form that they are, right? Take the, they basically are characterized or are of the nature of this type of unamenability to scientific research. My research colleagues and I have going to produce a book. It's going to be out very shortly, probably, if not this month, then next month. And its title is Western Construction of the Caste System, right? And when we talk about the Western construction of the caste system, we don't ally ourselves with other social scientists, like some of the historical anthropologists and so on, who say, well, okay, caste system didn't exist in Indian traditions at one time, but since the intervention of the colonial state, it exists now, right? Precisely because of the kind of things you were referring to, like just that you mentioned also the activities of the census takers and so on, right? That, okay, at one time it wasn't there, but then the colonial officials came and now it's there, right? But we don't accept that, right? We say, actually, you have to look at the kind of creature the caste system is, or the idea of the caste system, not the caste system as it exists in social reality, because we also say there is no such thing in empirical reality. It doesn't exist, right? So how is it that we've come to understand Indian traditions and culture and society in this particular way? Right? So what we've done is we've gone back. Some of our team, they are sort of experts in looking at the older material, colonial material, theological material, and so on. And we've discovered some very, very interesting stuff. One of the things that we realize is that it's not only about colonialism, it's also about Christianity, and the particular way in which Christianity constituted the background of the research activity that went into Indian culture, studying Indian culture and society. Right? And one of the things we realized is that at that time, when India was beginning to be opened up to Europeans, certain things were happening within European culture as well. Right? There was the Reformation. There was a contest between the Protestants and the Catholics mainly, right? And the Protestant theologians had to develop an alternative theological system, right, in order to criticize, first of all, the Catholics, but also they put their critical lenses on alternative traditions that were existing in Europe, and particularly Jews. Right? And it's very, very interesting how the polemic produced by the Protestants vis-a-vis, first of all, the Jews and the Catholics, went into then the study of Indian society and culture. Right? So, if we hear a lot about Brahmins and Brahminism and so on. The Brahmins became the equivalent of the false priests of Catholicism, right? Because obviously the Catholic religion was, one of the outgrowths of paganism, right? They still retain all these pagan rituals, and of course, who was responsible for it? Priests, right? They were the ones who were acting as intermediaries between God, right? To whom the one God to whom true worship is merited, and the believer. So the priest became the archetypal enemy. They took that structure, went to India, and said, okay, here is a priestly religion, and hey presto, it's the priests who organize this society into an oppressive hierarchical structure. Now, why should it be oppressive? What is oppressive about Indian culture the way they saw it? Right? It wasn't the actual empirically existing social structures, right? It was also something that the theology lent itself some kind of stability to. Yeah, and this theology is a Protestant theological backdrop that people who are coming from Europe were using as a framework to study India. It's oppressive because the priests not only create and maintain this hierarchical structure, but they mislead followers of Hinduism. They said they created a term called Hinduism and said this is what the priests of the false religion of Hinduism hold their people to. Right? In other words, they're preventing the people from seeing the true revelation. Of course, the true revelation is Christianity. They did see other reform movements, right? So they of course, the Protestant Reformation happened. Martin Luther had, stuck his demands on the wall, and this year I think is 500th anniversary of that event, right? So this 500-year official Reformation began 500 years ago this year. They saw the Buddha as, if you like, an archetypal, an exemplar of the kind of Martin Luther figure. They saw Mahavir as that. Interestingly, they also saw Guru Nanak as a Martin Luther of India, right? Because, of course, he was critical of the Brahminical ritual traditions, and it was against hierarchy, and Sikhism, of course, had its own holy book, and so on. So the closest approximation you could get to Protestant Christianity in the Punjab was Sikhism, right? Interestingly, even Sikhism, the name Sikhism wasn't there. Right? It's creation of the British Orientalist tradition. So you get different, so-called, the creation of different religions in India, right? You see the Buddhism, the Jainism, Sikhism, and so on. And of course, they're all supposed to counter the monolith of Hinduism, which is the big container of the oppressive caste system. Of course, all Indian traditions are false religions. Right? None of them is really true, because we know that the really true one is the non-pagan Christian revealed religion. Right? That's the only true one. But some of them might be getting a little bit closer to. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but a lot of the things that we're talking about today and how they've come into the social sciences are an inheritance of that legacy. What happened after the theological production of such ideas is that very soon, actually, social scientist writers, people like J.S. Mill, right, if you can call him a social scientist, political theorist, lots of other people followed them, right? The scholar administrators, so many of them, right, who went to India but also studied Indian culture and society, the census takers, right, all of them, in their different ways, gave their own take on, but they all, in a way, came through this theological structure. It's the theological background that really informs even the secular production of knowledge about Indian culture and society. And Jagbir is absolutely right, if I may say so, right, how that tradition has basically been taken over into the Indian social sciences as well today. Right? Indian social scientists have been particularly conspicuously poor at reflecting on this heritage and understanding how key facts, let's say key components of Christian theology have become their facts in the allegedly scientific theories that they're producing about Indian traditions, culture, society, whatever you want to call them, right? And the caste system is, if you like, an exemplary instance of that. It epitomizes in many other ways what's happened to the Indian social sciences, or social scientific study about India, right? And that's something that's been perpetuated in the West, right? Because they've never really seriously come to terms with how they've been creating problems, right? for themselves in their encounter with India, and the Indians haven't reflected sufficiently and on how they've never really understood this European heritage, right? And how it's going, and that I think partly accounts, at least partly, accounts for the persistence of the idea of the caste system, because at root it's religious. Right? It's a religious product of Christian theology. Right? That is what the caste system is. Right? And because it's gone into the background today, there is an instinctive impulse among Europeans and so many other people in the world today, right, to say, actually, yeah, of course, India has a caste system. One of the first things you'll encounter among people who are not themselves Indians is that you're from India, caste system. Right? It's such a typical reaction. I'm sure all of us can identify it, but they might not know anything else about India, but they know that it's got a caste system. You know, that's how second nature it's become, because it's passed into the folk wisdom of European culture about how we see Indian tradition in society. So that's, I just wanted to say that because I think it's very important to understand that we cannot actually simply say, oh look, this fact doesn't fit within your theory, this fact doesn't, because Orientalism is of such a nature, has such a character, that you cannot use factual evidence to combat Orientalism. It's not that kind of structure, it's not that kind of knowledge structure. Right? What you need to really do is to expose the way in which Orientalism arranges knowledge, right, for consumption. That's the only way you can really expose the problem of Orientalism. You can't combat it by using facts, because we've seen that already, and Jagbir has told us, right, that the more anomalies you produce, the stronger the structure keeps on becoming. Right? Because none of us has really ever abandoned the idea of the caste system. We all think that it's there, it exists, it tells us something about Indian culture and society. But once you break it down, we realize that there's no such thing, but we keep coming back to it. Right? How comes that is the case? Now, of course, in India, there's been other things which have been happening. I'll very cautiously mention the word Indira Gandhi, because Indira Gandhi created many problems in India, of course, right? She was a strong leader, but in some way she created problems in India. And one of the things she did was to empower leftist intellectuals in Indian universities. Right? She basically endowed the universities to these leftist intellectuals. And one of the things that they've done is actually they have, on the Indian side, strengthened the problem of the caste system, in the sense that they've prevented research from taking place. Right? Research that would expose this entire heritage of Orientalism and Christian theology, and allow us to see the caste system for the kind of entity it is. And today, 2-3 generations down the line, you will see many people who've gone through the higher education system in India who also think it's a kind of, for them it's a kind of second nature thing, you could say, right? That of course India has a caste system and we must fight it. Now, one of the other things I want to pick up, right, is, on this point about Indira Gandhi and the university and so on, one of the things I wanted to say is that part of the reason why we cannot expect Indian social scientists themselves to tackle this problem is precisely because of that more recent heritage. Right? They themselves have prevented themselves from developing an alternative account of Indian culture and society in a scientific sense, and rather colluded in the reinforcement of this old, if you like, Christian theological and Orientalist paradigm. Right? So that's created a lot of problems for us, because the British government tomorrow could say, look, they could ask 100 Indian social scientists, do you guys know have a hierarchical caste system which is oppressive? They will also, most 99% of them would say yes, of course we have, right? So then the Indian community here is screwed, right? Because Theresa May could say, look, we've asked 100 Indian social scientists, and they would say, well, do you think it's reasonable to claim that this system would have inevitably moved into the diaspora? The Indian social scientists would say, of course that's true. Right? So you're not going to get any new information from Indian social scientists if you're going to consult them about this. Right? That's how entrenched the whole problem is. Right? And of course, the Western social scientists haven't done their homework either, because in a sense they are even more trapped in this Western, we can call it a kind of Western epistemic system, right? Which continues to reinforce the whole of the social sciences, even though they have so many inherent problems. Right? In a sense, they are the secularization of theological knowledge, we can say. Yeah, in terms of the kind of claims they make about the human beings and mankind and so on. Anyway, on to the caste legislation. Now, it's not news to most of you that the caste legislation had 2 layers, the 2010 episode and the 2013 episode. In 2013, it became an obligation for the government to legislate, to enact legislation. making caste discrimination part of the Equality Act, making it an aspect of race so that it would be amenable to the same kind of claims for discrimination as the Equality Act generally allows. But it was prevented from doing that because of perhaps the reaction mainly from the communities, not the academics. Right? I think we've played a very marginal role. It's the communities who really came together and said, guys, we don't want this. Yeah? Be careful. Right? You might even lose votes. Right? And so that made people stand up and say, oh no, there's something wrong here. But unfortunately, intellectuals haven't played their role in the way that they should have. Right? Partly because of the kind of problems that they find it really difficult to actually overcome their own inheritance and prejudices. Right? And they don't see them as prejudices. They see them as, basically that they are relaying factual information about Indian culture and society, but they are not. And that's what our new book will hopefully say. Now, 2010, 2013, then in 2014-15, there was this parallel track case, right, where the judges went ahead and said, fine, the legislation hasn't been implemented, but we will read caste as if it already exists via the descent principle. Right? So they work backwards, as Mukesh Bhai said. We have caste going further back, the higher categories descent, going further back, the higher categories ethnicity, and going further back, the higher categories race. Right? So in race and ethnicity are specifically mentioned in the Equality Act. So it looks as though our current interpretation of the Equality Act already contains some provision against caste discrimination. Right? So now we come to 2017 and the current consultation. Now in the current consultation, it's almost as if we've been given two options. Right? One option is that do you want the legislative route, which already exists from 2013 as a duty for us to enact specific legislation. In some senses, I would say the legislative route is the lesser of the two evils. They're both evil, but the legislative route is big. Why do I say that? Because if you enacted legislation, you could at least put some safeguards in. Yeah, you could say caste discrimination doesn't apply to X sphere of activity, Y zone, yeah, Z, whatever, right? Sphere. So in that sense, you could actually put in all kinds of exemptions and exceptions into the Equality Act to make sure that caste discrimination doesn't apply to areas where you really, for example, you want the associational life of the community. Many of the Indian community organizations are jati-based organizations, right? And we don't apologize for that because that's how our traditions have always functioned in a sense, right? They might have some kind of corporate identity now, or some kind of charity status or whatever, right? That's just, if you like, living under the umbrella of the British legal system. That's how they've transformed themselves. But their basis is still, their membership is still a jati-based membership. Right? Now, do you want that to be made unlawful? Yeah. Do you want the events that they hold, let's say they have a Navratri event or whatever it is, right? A wedding, right? And they're holding it on the premises that they own and operate, right? Do you want those kind of activities to be made unlawful? Well, if you have an unlimited exposure to caste discrimination in the Equality Act, caste discrimination claims it, that's exactly what you're going to get. Because any busybody can come along and say, guys, what you're doing is unlawful. Imagine, I come from a Jati called Visawashwa, right? Many of you may or may not be familiar with it, I don't know, right? Now, let's say, I'm a disgruntled person and I really want to make a point. I might even bring a case against my own community, right? Because I will say, look, how comes your membership is based only on descent from those 52 villages in Saurashtra, in Gujarat, right? I want to make a point of it. That's caste discrimination. Next thing you know, courts will say, yeah, Visawashwa Association of the UK has to be, has to be held in breach of caste discrimination. Next thing, what will happen? They will lose their charity status, right? A huge chunk of their funding base is gone, right? Tax exempt status, right? All kinds of things could happen, right? They will be extremely constrained in the future from holding all sorts of activities. What will happen to their terms of membership? Do they have to adjust them? Do they have to abandon them? Do they have to let everybody in? Right, into the organization and offer the same benefits at the same rates, like let's say at the same prices to everybody, right? Because not doing so would also expose them for claims of caste discrimination. So the legislative route might be the lesser of two evils. We've tried to argue, I've tried to argue certainly, right? And as part of the anti-caste legislation committee, we've tried to argue that both the case law option and the legislative option should be abandoned, right? Or should be rejected. Now, with the case law, if we are compelled to simply accept the case law, it means that the whole spread of the Equality Act will apply to caste. The whole spread, right? No exemptions, no exceptions. For that, you need legislation, right? Why am I saying whole spread? Why? Because caste is an aspect of race, according to the judicial determination, according to the case law. Right? It's been made an aspect of case indirectly already. Right? Now, race is the protective characteristic in the Equality Act with the fewest exemptions. It applies the most widely. Right? If you compare it to religion, which has lots of exemptions built into it, if you look at gender, also lots of exemptions, etc., right? Sexuality, what have you, right? They're all different protected characteristics. Race has the fewest. Now, imagine race as part of, caste is part of race. The fewest exemptions will apply, right? Most of your activities as jati-based organizations and perhaps even as employers, yeah, as public authorities, all of them will be open to scrutiny for all kinds of activities, particularly when you're employing South Asian employers, when you're confronting South Asian-led businesses, right? All of those activities will immediately be open to scrutiny. I mean, they would be anyway. I would imagine, like, even if there's a legislative enactment, right? I think, is that option 1? No, that's option 2, isn't it, in the consultation,
yeah.
right? So even if there's legislative enactment, I don't think they would exempt businesses, right? I don't think that they would exempt employment, right? So all of those spheres would actually be right up for grabs. If there's a troublemaker in your workforce, or you have a customer who is a troublemaker, and they want to say, oh, my goods didn't get supplied on time, but the guy next door, he got his goods on time. You're discriminating on grounds of caste, aren't you? Right? You are going to have to prove your innocence, right? Because the cards are loaded against you. The dice is loaded. Right? Every time a claim of caste discrimination comes, we know that Indians follow a caste system. We know that it's discriminatory and oppressive. Right? You have to disprove,
Yeah.
right, that you did not, you discriminated.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to have to do. Yeah. The burden, in fact, actually, the formal burden of proof is on the person who claims it, who claims discrimination. But in this case, it's not going to be.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, the Equality Act also has this mechanism, which many of you might not be aware of, the reversal of burden of proof. There is a facility in the Equality Act which allows for that. As soon as I submit a certain amount of prima facie evidence, the burden of proof shifts anyway, right? And that doesn't matter whether it's caste or other grounds. It's already there, right? But imagine how easy it would be in caste cases to shift that burden of proof, right? So what we're saying is that, look, make sure that Parliament repeals both the case law, and we don't want any legislative enactment. So that provision which makes it a duty for the government to produce a legislative enactment should also be repealed, right? And ideally, both of them should be repealed in the same amendment. Right? Make them part of the Great Repeal Bill, I say. And that's not an ironic, it's not I didn't mean to make a pun out of it, because it certainly would be a great repeal bill should that happen. I think great for us, right? Because we've spent a lot of energy. I mean, like Jasdev, I didn't know anything about caste about 4 or 5 years ago, right? I never looked into that. I'm somebody who teaches cultural diversity and law. Right? I'm about to start a course on religion and law next session in my university, right? And I had never studied anything about caste or caste discrimination. Right? But when this piece of legislation, originally legislation and then case law came on came to our notice, I was alarmed, because I could see that there was some kind of problem going on. It's going to happen here. Right? And since then we've spent our energy, just FG and myself and some other people here, analyzing the implications of what will happen. Right? And I think it's not nice. And I don't think we really want to see this kind of legislation, which is based on entirely false criteria, right? False assumptions.
Taking time bomb.
And what's really interesting, the consultation, introduction section of the consultation document says, we don't know how to define caste. This is the government. We don't know how to define caste, exactly just as you already said. And there is no evidence for caste discrimination. Well, if none of these things are there, why are you guys even consulting us? Yeah. And this is the other thing I wanted to just emphasize, is that the act of putting this onto the communities to make us respond to the consultation is a crime, right? Because the government knows what the right thing to do is. They already know. We've sent them so many representations on these issues, right? They already know, and they partially admit that in the consultation document. Well, why don't they do the right thing? Right? Because we know that there's somebody else who's looking over the shoulder.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just us. Right? There's a lobby which we've since come to christen as the pro-lobby, right? The pro-lobby.
Christian being the operative word.
No pun intended at all. They are, and, you know,
I like it.
and I really wouldn't accept what you've said, sir, about the dissent line, because you know one of the original proposals by Lord Leicester, he's a famous anti-discrimination lawyer in the House of Lords, but he's part of the pro-lobby. He said his proposal was to actually extend dissent or include dissent, and he thought that that's going to cover caste discrimination. That was a deliberate proposal on his part, but he was outvoted, and then other people said, no, we should have a specific provision on caste. Of course, the British community, they're not stupid. They wouldn't want a broad brush provision on dissent. Although there is case law to that effect, which affected the Jewish community quite strongly. I personally would be against a law on dissent altogether. Why? Because any community, right, around the world which comes to Britain, which has a practice based on its ancestral traditions, would be prima facie treated as discriminatory. Right? That includes your African tribes, you know, all kinds of people who are coming with their ancestral traditions. Royal family. Imagine your inheritance laws. Yeah, the inheritance laws or the way you pass down property intergenerationally, yeah, in any country, including the UK, is based on dissent, for heaven's sake. Yeah, so they should stop really playing around with fire when it comes to dissent. Just stop it. Yeah. So okay, I think I'll stop there. I probably said enough.
Okay. Should we have questions, or should we go straight on to Satish? And because I know that we're going over time, and I think we want to come back more to some of the Prakash's discussion.
Papers and then.
Yeah.
Can I just say one sentence that this case law thing,
Yeah.
if it actually happens, it will spread around to the Commonwealth as well?
Oh, yes, I did mention that. Thank you for alerting me or prompting me. Because, yes, anywhere in the Commonwealth countries where the word race appears, you can read caste into it.
Yeah.
Right? So imagine Australian anti-discrimination law, Canadian anti-discrimination law, everywhere. Yeah.
And eventually it will reach the UN and will be declared apartheid state? It's possible.
That's already there, actually.
But
in some
that's
sense, yeah.
right. It's true. That's where the dissent came, because at the conference in Johannesburg and then Geneva, the lobby was to say actually India is a racist state in terms of practicing apartheid, and therefore caste has to be included. And that's where you're right. There was an own goal by the Indian state to actually say dissent is an aspect, and we'll just come from that perspective. It might have been a policy in terms of getting it out of the way, but what they did then was to say, actually, do you know what? It's already covered, so therefore let's just throw it for another day. And that was the own goal that was scored by the Indian state.
Thank you for that information. I wasn't aware of that. And if you're right about that, that is an own goal.
That's where I'm
absolutely. It's not an own goal. It's a goal against everybody else as well. They're compromising Indian
It's
diaspora.
precedent, isn't it? Because that precedent is now there.
Yeah.
That's what you got, yeah. And it was to counter the fact that the conference was on racism,
minutes just to
and the
get
state to that
spread their
is
legs,
apartheid.
have some
Lauren,
engagement.
okay.